Under the obsidian arches of the Great Fane, Kalen's fingers closed around Alara's. It was a ruinous breach of protocol, a warm, calloused palm pressing against her trembling skin. 1,000 Astrari nobles hissed in the shadows, their bioluminescent crests flashing a violent, judgmental violet. Would the peace break before the vows were even finished? If you want to see if this forbidden spark can outlast the coming storm, subscribe and stay close to the signal. We're going back to where the embers first began to glow. 6 months before that scandalous touch, Kalen had been scrubbing carbon scoring off a freighter's hull in the Orion Rim. His hands still shaking from memories of Aegis Prime. The grit under his fingernails was the only thing that felt real. The summons from High Command Drax changed everything. Kalen sat in the sterile briefing room, his jaw tight as the holographic display spun. To save 1 billion lives, he had to marry the monster that broke his soul. The Astrari were a people of ice and silence, a race that viewed emotion as a primitive contagion. Yet, the accidental destruction of their temple by Terran miners had pushed the galaxy to the brink. The journey to the capital world, Astria, was a blur of slipstream jumps and hollow instructions. High Command wanted a martyr in a dress uniform. Kalen just wanted to stop seeing the faces of his dead crew whenever he closed his eyes. Upon arrival, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of sterile incense and the low, rhythmic thrum of the planetary shield. The sovereign, Alara, was not what the propaganda suggested. While her people stood like statues carved from moonlight, she seemed brittle. The Astrari valued suppression above all, but Alara was different. She was an empath, a defective trait that made her a pariah among her own kin. They met officially in the High Garden, surrounded by crystalline flora that hummed in the breeze. Kalen felt the weight of her gaze, a heavy, searching pressure that seemed to bypass his scars. He stood rigid, his uniform buttoned to the chin. "I've been told you are a warrior," Alara said, her voice like glass breaking on silk. Her eyes didn't move from his. "They expect a hostage. They found a sovereign." Kalen didn't flinch. "I'm a veteran, ma'am. I know how to follow orders, even when they're a death sentence." The days leading to the ceremony were a choreographed nightmare of fittings and dry rehearsals. Kalen was fitted with the silver wrist cord, a heavy metallic braid designed to symbolize the binding of 2 souls by duty and obligation. Felt like a handcuff. He caught Alara watching the cord as the priest engineers calibrated the tension, her expression unreadable to anyone but a man who had spent his life watching for shifts in the wind. She began visiting him at night, slipping through the hidden passages of the palace that smelled of old stone and damp earth. They sat in the dark of his quarters, 2 ghosts haunting a diplomatic mission. Kalen told her about the blue skies of Earth. Alara spoke of the crushing weight of feeling 1,000 silent, hateful minds pressing against her own. In those shadows, the man with nothing left to lose found a reason to breathe. 3 days into their shared isolation, a message arrived from the starbound Vanguard, warning of unrest in the lower sectors. The weight of a crown is nothing compared to the weight of a secret shared in the dark. Subscribe now to witness the moment the silence finally breaks. The morning of the wedding, the air in the fane was freezing. Kalen stood at the altar, the silver wrist cord cold against his skin, watching the woman he had grown to pity, and perhaps more, walk toward him. She looked like a sacrifice. The silver wrist cord bit into Kalen's skin, a cold reminder of the debt he owed the dead. Beside him, Alara was a statue of white silk, but her pulse thrummed against his thumb like a trapped bird. The Archon Malachor stood in the high balcony, his bioluminescence a jagged, predatory red that the other nobles seemed too blind to notice. Then the shift happened. It wasn't a sound, but a sudden, violent ripple in the air. Alara's eyes went wide, her pupils blooming until they swallowed the iris. She didn't scream, but the way she leaned into Kalen told him everything. Her empathy wasn't just a defect. It was a sensor suite more sensitive than any Aegis Prime radar. The first needle round whistled through the space where Alara's head had been a fraction of a second before. Kalen didn't think. He reverted. He spun, pulling Alara behind the heavy obsidian plinth of the altar as the fane erupted into chaos. Malachur's guards shed their ceremonial robes to reveal blackened combat hardsuits. Kalen's hand went to the small of his back, finding the pulse pistol he'd smuggled in through the palace's damp undertunnels. "We have to go," Kalen grunted, the tactical map of the palace burning in his mind. "Not out." They moved through the garden tiers, a blur of shadow and steel. Alara led him, her hand guiding him toward threats he couldn't see. She pointed toward a thicket of singing ferns, and Kalen fired blindly, rewarded by the grunt of a falling assassin. They didn't stop until they reached Malachur's private sanctum, a room filled with the illegal hum of black market Terran tech. Kalen jammed a data spike into the primary console while Alara stood guard at the door, her face pale with the effort of filtering the sudden, sharp deaths occurring throughout the palace. The screen flickered, revealing shipments of forbidden rail slugs and encrypted NAV logs. Malachur wasn't just starting a war. He was selling the galaxy's funeral to the highest bidder. The data hissed into the spike just as the doors buckled. Kalen looked at Alara. She looked back, the fear in her eyes replaced by a terrifying, crystalline focus. "I can feel them," she whispered. "All of them. The pilots in the sky, the soldiers in the halls. They're afraid, Kalen. Use it." The space battle that followed was a symphony of impossible geometry. Kalen took the helm of a starbound Vanguard interceptor, but he wasn't flying alone. Alara sat in the co-pilot's chair, her eyes closed, her mind stretched thin across the vacuum. She fed him the intent of the rebel pilots before they even touched their thrusters. He danced between the rebel beams, a ghost in the machine, leading the loyalist fleet like a scalpel through the heart of Malachur's formation. When the dust of the debris clouds settled, the silence of the vacuum felt different, felt like a beginning. In the aftermath, Hegemon Valerius stood before the gathered masses, his voice amplified by the planetary arrays. He spoke of the defect that had become a shield and the hostage who had fought like a brother. The rigid traditions of the Astrari didn't break all at once, but they cracked enough for the light to get through. Kalen stood on the balcony of the new Terran embassy, the wind of Astria tugging at his cloak. He wasn't a soldier anymore, but he wasn't a ghost either. Beside him, Alara watched the horizon, where the strange, iridescent trails of Corran Federation ships were beginning to appear. A third player in a game that was finally becoming a community. He looked down at his arm. The silver wrist cord was still there. During the wedding, the priest engineers had tightened it as a mark of duty and obligation, a shackle to keep two enemies from drifting apart. Now the tension was gone. It hung loose, a simple piece of jewelry that rested against his skin. He reached out and touched the metal, feeling the warmth it had gathered from his own body. It no longer felt like a handcuff. He looked at Alara, and for the first time, she didn't need her empathy to know exactly what he was thinking. He chose to stay. Kalen ran his thumb over the braided silver, the metal smooth and quiet under the three setting suns. What happens when the people we were taught to hate become the only ones who truly see us? Subscribe to join the next chronicle as we explore the borders of the known stars. Do you believe peace is a choice or a consequence? Tomorrow, the first contact with the Corran begins.